Welcome to the Crazy Cool Family Podcast with Don and Suzanne Manning. Parents, what if we could give you the power to transform your family into something absolutely amazing?
A family where everyone is healthy, gets along, loves Jesus, and has great purpose in life.
Hey, let us flip your thinking to unlock the power God has given you to create your own Crazy Cool family. We've got a great topic for you today. How to correct correctly.
What do you do when your kid's being a brat? That's really the bottom line we're going to talk about today.
How to keep your kid from being a brat. How about that?
Nobody wants their kid to be a brat, right?
Well, and so often, and when we talk about relational parenting, parents come up to us and say, hey, how do I keep my 3-year-old from being a brat? I've got to have control. And we agree with that. I mean, we totally agree. We don't want your kids to be out of control because, hey, parents, nobody likes your kids when they're a brat. I mean, when they're throwing a fit and,
Exactly.
in the middle of the restaurant or in the nursery or wherever it is. But yet, God still wants us to be relational even at these younger ages. So we're going to talk about some things about how to correct your child correctly, how to do it and still maintain the relationship, being firm, and having high standards for your kids. We were talking about this as we were preparing for the podcast. And Suzanne, we were talking about how our kids, especially as we got more into parenting, more into the relational aspects of things, we just don't remember, especially our boys. And if you remember us, we have older girls and younger boys.
Right.
We don't remember our last kids throwing near the fits that the other ones did. And it's,
Right.
Why do you think that was?
Well, I think that it kind of clicked with us, and I think that we started understanding what was the motivation behind the fits, and so we could actually stop the fit, the disobedience, the anger, whatever was coming our way. We could actually diffuse it on the front end because we had invested relationally.
Well,
with
and
them.
parents, another point that comes with that is sometimes parents, you're the one that's causing the fit. I hate to be the
that
bearer
for
of
sure
bad
was
news.
me in the beginning with the girls. I mean, I was a great example of what a fit thrower can and should do.
A great example.
Exactly. And so they did that as well. And when we realized, oh, that looks like me.
Or maybe it's things where we're being too controlling. I know that was my
And
issue.
so it's frustrating.
And
for
so
them.
I was frustrating my older kids when they were. I was exasperating them, and so they would have no option but to throw a fit. It would just turn them into an emotional basket case. And so one of the things I learned is how to. It goes to the first thing we're going to talk about: how to pick your spots. Because, there's a time and a place for everything because, when you look at your child as you pick your spots, two things you want to understand. One of them is childishness versus foolishness. And Suzanne, you're really good at explaining that. Why don't you tell them about it?
Right. Well, so childishness is just that like a child doesn't know what they don't know. An example that I was thinking about is like Bash and Truett, our little grandsons right now. They're 1 year old. Right. Yeah. And they are opening every cabinet, every drawer, and they are exploring. Well, they're not doing it to be disobedient. They're not doing it to even be foolish, which is the other side of childishness, foolishness. They are doing it because it's an adventure. It's new. It's exciting. They're learning. They're training their brains to what goes in cabinets and drawers and all that stuff. And so for me to turn around and say to them, don't open that drawer, that's actually correcting them in a place that they actually don't need to be corrected. They need to, what you do there is that when it comes to childishness, knowing your spots and knowing where to do that is you show them and you teach them, this is the cabinet, this has dishes in it. This is where mommy, gets her pots and pans to cook with. And so you show them and you teach them in the areas of childishness.
It was so funny today. We had Sebastian, one of our children over, and we were just playing with him and stuff. And then we got into kind of a business discussion, where we kind of moved into more productive mode, if you will. And he was sitting on the floor, and all of a sudden he just got flustered a little bit, because it didn't have anything to do with him. All we did, and it was really me more than Suzanne,
Well, because Don just has an intense tone of voice when he's talking about business, which has made him be a successful businessman. But when you've got a 10-month-old in the room, they don't understand.
And he just all of a sudden changed his whole countenance.
He would go,
yeah, he would.
Or he'd shake his head no.
Yeah, and it was so funny because we were like, Sebastian, it's not about you. But it just goes to show you that when parents, we have a lot of power over whether our kids throw fits or not. And It's not just our example, but it's our tone, it's choosing, and it goes into the first thing we're talking about, picking your spots.
Well, and so before you go into that thing right there, I do want to go back and talk about foolishness for just a minute and explain the opposite. So childishness and foolishness, that goes when you're picking your spots. A foolishness is when a child knows the rules and he chooses to break them. For example, let's say you've told the child you can only have 2 cookies and they eat 5, or they sneak 5, or they eat 5 and then they lie about it. And so that's the parts we're talking about when we say pick your spots. And so the childish spots, those are the places where you're going to train them and you're going to show them and you're going to teach them. But the foolish spots, that's the open door for you to correct your child. And that's what we want to talk about now. So when we talk about picking your spots, there's 2 things to know when to correct your child. And so the first one's pick your spots, and then the next one's to know your child. But let's talk about pick your spots.
Yeah. So one of the things parents you can do is really talk about this with your spouse and say, what are we gonna fall on our sword on? And really, and so often we expect things of kids that are not age appropriate. And we expect the 3-year-old to be able to fully clean their room, or we expect the 7-year-old to, be organized in his schoolwork or whatever. And so often it's just, and organized maybe to the level of where maybe a high school student should be or something, because that's where we are or whatever that is. And, so often picking our spots is just deciding what you're going to, if you're going to do everything, then chances are you're going to have a child that's going to feel beaten down by all the pressures of the parents.
Yeah, and so what you do when you pick your spots, what it does is it gives value and weight when actual correction is needed. If you're like Don talks about the discipline hammer all the time, and if you're going to bang absolutely everything that the child does, they didn't put their shoes on right, they didn't put their pillow on their bed, they didn't put their cereal bowl in the sink, if you're going to bang every single thing, then you are going to have a child that's beaten down, that's frustrated, that feels controlled all the time. And here's the deal, when it comes to correcting them on the things that really matter, to them, it sounds like all the other corrections. And so it's blank to them because there's so many that's coming at them. And so when you pick and choose the ones that are most important to you, then those actually have weight. Those are valuable, and your kids are going to respect those.
Yeah. So for example, in our house, for me in particular, lying was a big deal, that I wanted my kids to be honest. And so I would make sure that they, one of the things that was really big to me is you never talked bad to mom, and you would, you didn't bow up to the queen. You made sure that if especially when the boys got old, got to be a little bit older, or the girls, they didn't get to scream at mom. It would be, or really another one is you didn't get to scream at your brother or sister either. Those were things that came there, but on, and I really learned a lot of this from you, Suzanne, is that it was okay when they spilled something.
Right. And so, yes. Yeah, exactly. And so I wanted to just go back to the lying part, because I want to clarify the reason that we thought that was such a big deal is because lying tears the relationship up. And that's the goal between the parent and the child. And we want to build trust, and truth builds trust. That's the most important thing we can do. We want to completely trust our child. And it's really hard to do that when they're a liar. And so just know I loved it that was a big one for Don. I mean, that was an offense that got a huge correction on that. And so that was a really big one. And then you mentioned a little bit like disrespect, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But another one for us was also disobedience. That it's so important when our kids are obedient to us, because, it's nice for us, and and it makes parenting a lot easier, and it makes life peaceful. But reality is, parents, when we teach our kids to be obedient to us, what they're doing is they're practicing being obedient to an unseen God. And that is the most valuable thing we can do. So that's what, when we talk about, there's a couple example spots that you want to correct your kids on. Like Don said, get together with your spouse and talk about those things. Figure out the consequences on the front end. And so you're not having to think them up in the moment. And those are going to be your spots of correction. And then, like Don was saying, the spots that don't need correction, the spill, the break, making a mess, if they've inconvenienced you, if they're being slow to act. I don't know about you, but little kids just seem to take forever to put their shoes on and gather their things.
Yeah, it really bugs me when a parent is always on their kid about saying please and thank you and all
so
the
glad you
things
brought that up. Yes.
I mean, it's, and as parents, we do want our kids to say please and thank you, but man, you get into this endless correction cycle, and the kid just feels like they never do anything right. And really what you're doing is you're training your kid to withdraw. You're training your kid to be shy. You're training your kid because man, every time they step out, they're doing something wrong. And so you know, it's part of picking your spots is really just letting them. It's funny. I've used this example a lot, is when I first started parenting, my kids would say, shut up. And I would say, don't say shut up. And they would keep saying shut up. And I'm like, oh my goodness, my kids are dumb, because they keep doing this. And, but one day they just didn't say shut up anymore. It was something that we held to, but over time, I don't know when it happened, but it just happened sometimes. But it taught me that it takes a while for kids to learn things. And if I'm always on them, I'm going to turn them into fearful of me. I'm going to make them think that I'm always disapproving of them. And that's going to damage the relationship.
So pick the things. And so I did want to, on the backup or with that saying please and thank you, by all means, you do want your child to say please and thank you. Very, very important, but not in front of the person that they're saying it to. Let them have ownership. And so how we would do that is either Don or I would say please or thank you. Like one of my very favorite things Don would do is after a sporting event, he would walk up to the coach, if he wasn't coaching them, and shake their hand and say thank you. Thank you for coaching the team today. And my kids saw that, and without him ever telling them you need to thank your coach, they started doing that. So our example of please and thank you works. But also, if you really want to take it to the next level, then when you get in the car, tell your child, hey buddy, I think it'd be a great idea. What do you think it'd be a great idea to tell your coach, thank you? And so just use those moments, because once again, that is building relationship. You're inviting them in to your thought processes without telling them what to do.
Yeah. And it's just, it's really just not caring about some things as well. It's that, we just find that, you don't want to have a kid that's lazy. You don't want to have a kid that is, that's not doing what they need to do, but how you get there is going to be really critical. And learning to pick your spots, learning to give them some rope, learning to how to encourage them and be an example for them are things that can help you not have to correct nearly as much. Because isn't that a great goal, to not have to correct?
Oh, for sure. Nobody likes to be corrected. I don't like to be corrected.
I don't like to correct either. I don't really. Yes. I don't like to have to go in and go, do this and you're not doing that or whatever.
You'd rather just do it.
Well, or I'd rather them, I'd rather just have the relationship with them, because ultimately their performance is not as important as relationship. That's one of the things I really had to learn as a parent. And it relates to the second thing we were going to talk about, which is correction can be minimized when you know your child.
And who is better to know them but the parent that God has given them? I mean, they're half you, they're half your spouse, half their father. And so you are very intimately wound to know your child.
Is your child particularly sensitive? Is your child tender-hearted? Is your child more playful, more like a jokester type? What is the intent of what they're doing? When you can see past their behavior to what their intentions are and their personality, it really helps you learn how to correct your child.
Yeah, and so I just call those strengths. Like if you have a child that is tenderhearted, I call that a strength. Macy was one of our kids that was so tenderhearted, and as soon as we figured that out, then we had to parent her a completely different way. We couldn't come down hard on her.
Then we did say Madeline, her older sister, who was much more free-spirited, much more confident, much more,
straight
out
to the
there.
point. Just shoot and tell me what I did wrong. Tell me how to fix it, like that. But with Macy, you had to be tender because she was tender-hearted.
And a little bit with her would go a long way.
Well, because she was so hard on herself. She's a perfectionist. And so she was beating herself up way more than we would ever have beat her up with our correction. And so we didn't even need to correct her hardly because she knew what she had done wrong and she felt terrible about it. And so for us to heap more onto it didn't help her at all. It actually tore her down. And another one is that, another strength that your child would have is if they are teachable. And that is my favorite strength of a child, because if your child is teachable, then that's when you go in with the why. And we have a whole course on, it's in the why. We have on disciplining your kids, but there's a whole little section on life is in the why. And it just talks about if you can tell your kids what's going on and why that's happening, why they need to say please or thank you, or why they need to brush their teeth or wear their shoes outside, then if their strength is teachable, then you're going to win them over. They're going to want to do that because you've taught them the reason, and they're going to want to do it.
And parents, I don't care what your child is, what personality type there are, or whatever's happening, you don't ever get the right to be harsh with them. If you're harsh with them, it's going to damage the relationship every time. And it's not effective. I mean, it's effective in the short term. It's not effective in the long term. I mean, you can even use laughter in the correction.
Especially if you've got like a jokester. We've got some friends who have a little boy that he's just the biggest ham ever. And he gets on the mom's very last nerves sometimes because he's just being such a ham. And so the mom she was telling me just the other night that she has started using humor with him, and it has gone miles. If he makes a giant mess, then she'll say something along the lines of, well, apparently you like cleaning up messes, or else you wouldn't have made this giant mess. Just something that makes him laugh, or man, I wish beds could make themselves, but God didn't design it that way. So you better start practicing it, because I know that God wants you to be the best bed maker in the world. And so using some humor in that, if you've got that plate, because a lot of the times what happens is parents get frustrated with that jokester child because they're not a jokester. They don't resonate with that. And so they haven't embraced and chosen to see that as a strength. And so they get onto the child, or they correct the child to quit. This isn't a joke. We're not playing around right now. We're not having fun right now. Okay, kids are wired to have fun. What if you backed off and did have some fun?
Yeah. Yeah. And your attitude, parents, is so often I think we, as I said before, we create more of the fits than we stop because of our attitudes and because of, we're so frustrated ourselves. And so it goes back to our first commitment is to pursue God, to learn how to approach situations and see it from the child's perspective. But, sometimes you got kids that are just sneaky or manipulative, or, where, we have kids that have flaws. I know we all think our kids are perfect, but they're not. And especially when they're home, and especially when they're with us and they don't do things. And sometimes they're actually have evil intent,
Yeah, no. And I think that the weaknesses are just as powerful as the strengths. I mean, powerful in that they are opportunities for us as parents to connect and to relate with our kids. I mean, we all have our weaknesses. We have our thorns, if you will. And so what is it that we're going to do in those weaknesses? And so we've talked to parents before that they just said that my child is so manipulative. And what do you do with a manipulative child? And
maybe disrespectful or something, where they are also, maybe they're manipulative in that they can turn a fit on, the 3-year-old who can turn a fit on just like that. And it's not an emotional fit, it's to get what they want.
Exactly.
Or they're lying to get what they want, or they're so, maybe it's an older kid and they just tell their version of the truth, and it leaves out the details that are there that are condemning to them or whatever.
Yeah, and so kids use manipulation. They use their emotions to manipulate, like you said, Dawn. They cry, they throw fits, they're angry, slam doors, or they manipulate to be in control. And so as parents, how we step in, I mean, this is definitely an area where you want to correct. This is an area that you get to speak into your child's life. And so what does that look like? Well, for us, we called it out. Dude, you're manipulating the situation. You're throwing a fit to get what you want. And we would not give them what they wanted. Do not ever reward manipulation. Call it out. Do not reward it. And if they're wanting to control a situation and something that's going on, let's say that maybe it's bedtime and they're throwing a fit or they're ruling the roost when it comes to bedtime, then you need to say, okay, here's the deal. You are manipulating bedtime and we are not going to do that anymore. You are a child and you need to go to bed. And you can give them hope for the future. Someday you're going to own a house and you're going to buy the groceries and you're going to cook dinner and you're going to pay the bills and you're going to do all these things. And guess what? Then you can go to bed whenever you want. But right now, you have to go to bed so that you can grow to be that an adult. And so you just call it out and tell them, this is what you're doing, and this is why you're not going to do it. And then you put your consequence in there. I mean, what consequence that you and your spouse choose to do when that child's not going to bed.
Yeah, and that's a time to remove privileges and to do things that will take away, if I'm sorry, if you're going to throw a fit, we can't read stories tonight when we go to bed. If you're going to throw a fit about clean your room before we go to bed, then, and be firm with it. It's okay if they are devastated for a night. You're creating a little adversity so that they will change their behavior, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, and so that goes along with like maybe being sneaky. Like we had Molly when she was a little girl, and she was sneaky about brushing her teeth. Do you remember that? I think we've told the story a dozen times, and she even told us later, which we didn't. She told us later, much later, that she would just get her toothbrush wet, and we would think she was brushing her teeth. But to know that, okay, back to the removing the privileges, you don't get to brush your teeth alone now. Like a parent's going to have to be in there with you. Somebody's going to have to hold you accountable. I mean, and then another thing that we would do, especially when it comes to sneaky, is to step in and to educate them. We took her to the dentist and had the dentist tell her how valuable it was. We showed her pictures of rotten teeth, and so that she wouldn't be sneaky with that. And so sneakiness is the same thing as manipulation. You have to bring it into the light. You have to call it what it is. You're being sneaky. That was sneaky that you hid that in your room. That was sneaky that you took that from your brother. And then you remove it. You don't get to play with this anymore because you did that.
Yeah, and another one is that's along those lines is disrespectful tones and things like that. I don't know how we did it necessarily, but I do know that I don't know everything we did, but our kids just don't talk mean to each other, and they don't talk mean to us.
Yeah, you said that, though, in the beginning, though. You wouldn't allow it. You wouldn't allow them to talk to me disrespectfully.
Well, and I think we didn't do it to each other.
Right.
You and I didn't do it to each other.
And we didn't do it to them. I mean, there's so many times that I hear parents maybe talking rudely to their children, and then their children turn right around with the exact same tone, exact same inflection, and say it to the parent, and then the parent's like, don't be rude to me. Don't be disrespectful.
Yeah, and it's like, well, you just
set
the
language
we
were speaking.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought that's what we were doing. So with our kids, I would just tell them, you're being rude. I would call it for what it is. That's rude. You're saying that rude. And I remember saying it several times. I said, it makes my heart beat fast when you talk to me like that. It stresses me out. It hurts my feelings when you talk to me like that, because it does. I mean, it flustered me when they did. And then I would say, I don't talk to you that way, and I won't talk to you that way. And if I ever do talk to you that way, please say, Mom, you're talking rude to me, because I want to be accountable too. And so now we've raised the standard. Instead of us talking at each other, we're talking to each other, and we're talking for each other.
And dads, and maybe moms too, but I know that I know a lot of guys that have this issue that I minister to. But we tend to talk a certain way in the workplace, and then we come home and we have a lot of those same tone of voice, and especially with daughters, I just found that my tone of voice was, they would just go, oh, Dad's mad. I'm like, I am not mad. Why does everybody think I'm mad? What's your tone of voice? Oh my goodness. But I had to learn that I was carrying a tone that was doing that, what Suzanne said, it was harming people. And I had to change that tone in order to, I could keep it that way, but it just was beating my kids up, especially my daughters. And so tone is a lot. You don't get to be if you're a yeller, you're angry a lot, guess what? You're going to create an environment where your kids are going to be angry. They're going to yell and scream, and you're not going to like it. So if it kind of starts with us. So I think as we wrap up here, I want to tell parents so much is that what I've learned over the years, if you would have seen us especially me, I guess both of us as I think about it, but when we were the first 5 years of 7 years of parenting, we were very impatient. We yelled a lot. And we consequently got kids that threw fits. But we learned maybe in that last half of the first decade into the second decade that, hey, we got to know our child. Hey, we got to pick our spots. Hey, we got to change our tone. And guess what? We created a culture in our home where fits don't get thrown. Fits didn't get thrown. I mean, and now it's interesting watching our daughters do it with their and their husbands with their these little 1-year-olds, and they're teaching them. They're creating an environment where those kids are not going to throw fits. I think we're going to see that.
Well, and they're creating an environment where they know when to correct and when to not, not to pick on them and tear them down with all the little corrections, but to pick their spots.
And we're seeing our parents that we're training the same way, is that they're coming to us and going, my kid used to throw fits all the time, and now it doesn't happen as much anymore. Did the kid change? Maybe, yes. But also really what happened was the parent changed. And so we need to, and really let's finish up as we wrap up with, some parents will say, oh, well, this doesn't work for me because my child is strong-willed and they're going to be the ones that, overpower me. Guess what?
I just think strong-willed kids get a bad rap. I mean, I really do. I think that parents maybe buckle to the strong will, or they try to control the strong will. But that's not at all.
But really, I would change that word to, we need to channel their strong will.
That's good.
And instead of making it against us, let's make it for them and for us, and figure out how to do the things we're talking about. As you pick your spots, as you get to know your child and you educate them, you will start to channel their strong will. And strong-willed children are great because they're going to change the world. They're going to go, and I always say, give me kids with energy. Don't give me deadhead kids because I want kids with energy because they're going to have life and they're going to be fun. But they also take some work. So
that's good.
So hey, parents, as we wrap up here, just remember that so much of how you correct your child is about you, and you can make a lot less fits happen in your home with the way you approach your child, by picking your spots, by getting to know them, by educating them, and then when it's necessary, coming down hard on them and making sure that everything is in order, standing up for what you believe in for your family. Any final words, Suzanne?
No, I just want to encourage you to take some time to pay attention to what your child's strengths and weaknesses are and correct out of those. Find those places where there are weaknesses and correct those places through their strengths and how that they learn best. When you do that, you're going to build relationships with them. You're going to make those connections, and it's going to make the connection that you have with each other so strong and so sweet.
So hopefully we've helped you in stopping fits in your home and having to get your kid not be a brat, and how to correct correctly. Go be crazy parents, crazycoolfamily.com.